Good evening, everyone. I am told on a Friday evening in London to listen to somebody, especially on a book launch, is the biggest sin you can commit here. As I was coming, there are people outside on the roads drinking beer, and here we are talking about one of the world's oldest, longest, continuous, and perhaps the most liberal civilization, the Indian civilization. Thank you, Minister Rajan. Thank you, Friends of India. Thank you, Indic Academy. Thank you, I Am Buddha Foundation, and all the fans and supporters and lovers of a great land called India. I'm here because I have experienced an extraordinary, I had an extraordinary experience in last decade. Like all young, modern, urban people, I was also busy in making money, trying to grow in life, and I slowly found myself sucked into mediocrity. I was working in a place called Bollywood, making the kind of films everybody wants to watch, telling stories which people really want to hear, especially love stories. But then I realized, was that the purpose of my life? I was feeling very frustrated somewhere. I thought I was getting sucked into mediocrity. And that's the time I decided to change my profession. And I started teaching. And what I did was, I picked up the great strengths of Indian civilization, our philosophy, our thinking, and made a module for global leadership called I Am Buddha for Global Leadership. I was teaching this in many institutes. One of the institutes is called Indian School of Business. It's in Hyderabad. Indian School of Business is one of the 10 best business schools in the world. Some students asked me to mentor a small documentary. And that's why they say greatest of the revolution started with smallest of the ideas. Problem was that they were making it as a corporate social responsibility project, and they were putting in their own money. So I told them, if you make a documentary, nobody is going to watch it after some time. Even your friends, you'll have to every time buy a bottle of single malt to invite them. That also they won't watch and nobody will remember. You are the future CEOs of the world. Why don't you raise money and make a proper feature film so that the world gets to know about it? And within no time, they wrote to a lot of alumni, a very small amount of money. It's impossible to make film in 1.5 crores. They raised that kind of money from one investor in Hyderabad. And they gave me a story which I bought. The story was very simple, that there's a woman CEO who goes to the jungles of Bastar. She has mining interest there. The character was based after Indra Nooyi and all these successful women CEOs. And there is some technical snag in her helicopter and she gets stuck. And she has to spend 4 or 5 days with Naxals. And when she comes back, she has a change of heart because in these 5 days she learns how wonderful these Naxals are. And they have a reason why they have picked up the gun, and she justifies that. And I was sold on that because that's a popular mainstream narrative, that army is generally wrong, terrorists are generally good. We come from a film industry which has celebrated dacoits, has left no stone unturned to celebrate dacoits. When I was young in school, I used to visualize myself as a dacoit. I used to hold that toy gun and I used to do da-da-da-da and shoot all the people, thinking that dacoits are the real heroes, which was wrong. Then one day, I believe in Saraswati. So, blessings of Saraswati or divine intervention, that just on the eve, when I was just some time before I was about to shoot that film, where this CEO starts believing that Naxals are wonderful people, I looked through a lot of research. And I realized that since 1970s, almost every government of that day has submitted in the parliament that India's biggest internal security threat comes from this Naxal Maoist movement. The last government of Manmohan Singh, they also put a paper in the parliament. Home Minister admitted that. The new government, Home Minister, Prime Minister, everybody has said it so many times in the parliament. There has been no dearth of this warning. Despite that, in 50 years, we never recognized that India's real threat actually comes from the Naxals. In next few minutes, I'll tell you why. See, there are two things. You have to understand, for thousands of years, we have been fighting a war of narratives. We are fighting for domination. Whenever we speak, whenever we write, whenever we go pick up gun and take a war, it's for domination. And the narrative which has been dominating so far has been the Kashmir narrative. I know it's a sensitive word. Don't worry, I'll not put anybody into any kind of complications. But when I studied the number of people, innocent people, or the Jawans, or the security forces, the total number of people killed in the Kashmir conflict, in the total 60, 70 years, is less than the number of people who are killed in the Red Corridor almost every year. For 50 years inside India, people with the guns have been killing CRPF Jawans and innocent men, women and children. The schools have been blasted, hospitals have been destroyed, and roads almost on everyday basis have been destroyed, have been blasted with IED. Despite that, the mainstream narrative has been that the Naxals are championing the cause of Adivasis. And when I did my research, we realized that you will never ever meet any Adivasi who would say, yes, my life has improved because of this movement. So there was a very big logical flaw in that. I questioned that. I questioned two things. Only two questions I raised. Number one was that who has been funding them for last 50 years? Today when you organize this function, you require some money, time, resources, infrastructure, organization, and the potential and willingness to organize this. Now here there is a potential to organize. Where does potential comes from? Is it coming from Government of India is not doing that? Any sane citizen of the country will never ever fund an armed conflict. Then who has been doing it? There are various studies done by UNO, by various governments including USA and UK and Germany and France, and there are many independent studies done by scholars in universities and research organizations, and all of them put the blame on the Confederation of Terror Organizations, which are found primarily on the eastern side of India. A lot of detail is available on Google. I don't want to waste time into technical things. I'll tell you what I'm here to speak on. And I figured out, and the second question I raised was, where do they get the cadre from? Every year, hundreds and thousands of young boys and girls go and join this movement, pick up guns. Who recruits them? They come from all good colleges of India, universities of India. Then who's recruiting them? And when I put lots of facts and figures together and put the dots together, I realized, which everybody admits in the world now, that there is a nexus between some of our academia, NGOs, intelligentsia and Naxal. When I say intelligentsia, I do not mean intelligent people. I mean people who call themselves intellectuals. And these people work for policy, in policy with Government of India, they work in research, and they work in all those kind of institutions which ultimately creates the mainstream narrative. Then we made a film called Buddha in a Traffic Jam. I changed the story. Thankfully, nobody knew about it. It's only when the film was completed and the people who had invested some money in the film, they saw the film, and after that they disappeared. They said, we can't be associated with this film because it's too far-fetched an idea. They said, how is it possible that you are showing in the film that professors recruit, professors work for Naxal cause, and a lot of intellectuals work for Naxal cause, because in India it is believed कि अगर भगवान खड़े हैं और माता पिता खड़े हैं और गुरु खड़े हैं तो सबसे पहले गुरु के पांव छूने चाहिए. For 5 years this film was stuck. The students who started the movement, they also saw the film. Till date I have not seen their faces. I don't know where they are. Slowly, one by one, despite me having made lots of successful films, the distributors, studios, everybody left the film, and I was left alone with a film with no takers. I lost all the friends in the industry, and there came a time I had no work. People stopped meeting, and I was sitting alone in total darkness, nowhere to go. That's when I realized, again, Saraswati's blessings or divine intervention. Something told me that just because it's been shot on camera does not mean it's a feature film and it has to go through the regular distribution process. I said, it's a story. Why don't I take this story and show it to students in universities? So I started writing to different cinema departments of universities. One of the major universities department, cinema department, the head of department, she refused to show this film. But few days later, they were showing some other film which was on LGBT rights. That was the deciding moment for me. I realized there is big politics behind it. I was told your movie is an alternate narrative and there is no space in universities for alternate narrative. First of all, thematically that's wrong. But my question was this, that my film was saying the threat on Indian state. I was not talking about a government. Every single person recognizes that intelligence agencies, intelligentsia, government of the day, governments of the past, international community, there is nobody in this world who does not recognize the fact that Maoism indeed is India's biggest internal security threat, having killed thousands and thousands of people, but it was considered an alternate narrative. Whereas the fringe subjects were considered to be mainstream narrative. That's when I decided that no, I have to stand up for this cause. And I found the purpose of my life. After that, since 2016 or 14, I have been continuously traveling into universities and campuses, meeting people. Even if there are 4 or 5 people, I go and meet them, I talk to them. Why I talk to them? Because I understood when I was growing up as a small town middle class boy in India, I spent most of my life struggling with something I called an English mindset. You will never ever find more and more people I meet, be it me or Minister Rajan or Sir you or most of the people sitting here, if you have spent your youth in India, you will find a young Indian boy or girl has to waste 15, 20 years of his life just fighting English language and English mindset. After that, he becomes so numb that, or so self-defeated, or he starts having so much of self-doubt that he goes quiet. Which is the reason we have given a lot of space to people who do not want to see the Indian growth story. What is the reason, you tell me? In a country, in a civilization which has given birth to some of the most peaceful and enlightening religions, I call them social philosophies, Hinduism, Sikhism, Jainism, Buddhism, and despite giving birth to some of the finest and some of the most original, revolutionary political thinkers like Krishna, Chanakya, Mahatma Gandhi, Ambedkar, Bose, there is no dearth of political thinkers in India. My question was, what is Stalin, Lenin and Mao doing in a country like India? When I studied, there is no democracy in the world which has political parties based after ideologies of Mao or Lenin or Stalin. On top of that, we also have some leaders who are called Stalin and Lenin, and there are filmmakers who are called Lenin and all that. I don't know what's the exact figure because there are various figures on Google, but generally they quote between 150 million to 250 million people who are killed by just these 3-4 people put together. Even if the number is 100,000, it's very, very sad. And more people I have been meeting, tirelessly, without taking a breath. I have traveled and met thousands of and lakhs of young boys and girls. India's current problem is this, that a narrative is being created which is to demoralize us, which is to create doubt amongst us, to make us feel that we are not a genuine growth story, to make us feel that India actually is not what it actually is. So lots of narratives start. One fine morning when you get up, I get to learn that suddenly India is an intolerant country. I was in USA for last 1 month, traveling various cities. We had gone to do 10 events. You will be glad to know that impromptu there were more than 30 events we did, sometimes 2-3 events in a day. Here also I came just to do one event, and now I'm doing event after event. Tomorrow I was supposed to go only to Oxford. Now the IIT Association, they also invited me. I said, chalo karte hain. Now what are the things which are said against us? That we are intolerant, that women are not empowered in our country, that our society is divided on caste lines. I was at Purdue University recently, I told you guys yesterday, and there's a student who told me when the inventor of internet came to give a lecture in Purdue, Purdue is one of the 5 best universities in the world, and he was saying what are they doing technologically in different countries. When this young student, research scholar, asked him, what is your plan for India? He said, India is not on our map right now because India has a lot of caste issues, caste problems. And you meet every boy and girl in Indian universities or outside India, you will find they are made to feel embarrassed about the caste issue. I am not saying it doesn't exist. Of course it does exist. Indian fault lines are known more because all the NGOs are set up in India to discover Indian fault lines. If you transfer all those NGOs to America, you will discover that America is the worst country to live in the world. So NGOs' main job is to figure out fault lines of a society. Since everybody thought we are a poor country, so all the NGOs were set up and we allowed them also. So let's just understand what is this Hindu civilization which I am talking about. The reason I say Hindu civilization, it's nothing to do with religion. Hindu civilization has grown, which has encompassed, enveloped, embraced, and helped Islam, Christianity, Sikhism, Buddhism, lots of other religious beliefs to grow under one big umbrella of Hindu philosophy. Let's look at intolerance. Let's start with political tolerance or intolerance. India is the only democracy in the entire world which allows any kind of political party. We are a multiple party system. We have hundreds of parties. In every election, there are hundreds and hundreds of candidates who stand. You are the only country which has a political mainstream political party based on Marx, Lenin, Stalin, Mao. Now Maoist is banned now, but still they exist in India. It's not that they do not exist, they do not contest elections. You can start party for any caste, any religion, any sect. There are parties for Dalits, for Brahmins, for Lingayats, for Kashmiri Pandits, for non-Kashmiri Pandits on anything. And I asked in America, in US, and I asked yesterday here also, are you allowed to have a party on Marx or Lenin and Stalin and Mao? Everybody's answer is no. The society is not willing to accept it, but we have accepted them. We have total absolute political freedom. you can tomorrow champion any cause, nobody stops you. Then why people think that we are intolerant people? Let's look at the education. You will find that in most of the countries, when I talk about democracy. In most of the democracies, there are only two kinds of education system. One is private, one is public. I don't know UK, what's the system, but as far as India is concerned, you can teach in whichever way you want. You have convent schools. You have, in Gurudwara, people are taught. You have madrasas. You have Bharati Vidya Bhavan. You have Guru Shishya, the Vedic style of teaching. You have schools like Rishi Valley and all. They do not believe in any kind of formal education, no exams and nothing. You have various systems of educating. If you want your child to grow up in whichever way you want, you can do that. In America, that is not allowed. If you want your child to learn in Guru Shishya Parampara or Vedic Parampara, you will be put behind the bars because they don't allow. You have to send them in that school or that school. You have no choice. Now let's look at the diversity of India. When we talk about diversity, normally in the West, the kind of diversity they talk about is a lot of people living together in one geographical area. But they never interact with each other. Chinese do not interact with Indians, Indians do not interact with Japanese, Japanese do not interact with Korean people. People generally do not, whether you go to Germany or France or America, wherever you go, you'll find there is diversity that people live there for jobs, but they do not interact, they do not mingle with each other. But India is the only country, please come. Welcome, please sit. You'll find India is the only country in the entire world where you cannot spend even one day without interacting with people of different faiths, different regions, different languages, and different economic strata. You have to think about it, try to understand. In the West, if you are middle class, chances are you can spend most of your life just interacting with the middle class. The people who you are comfortable with. But in India, by default, you have to, on daily basis, interact with slum dwellers, you have to interact with rich people. So you are exposed to various food, various attires, various cultures, rituals, beliefs. Therefore, you will find our society believes in total acceptance. Tolerance is not our concept, it's an alien concept. Tolerance means someday it's going to break. Tolerance means how much you can tolerate, how much elasticity you have. Someday, any kind of tolerance has to break. When your friend's child comes and lives in your house, or your brother's child or somebody, your relative's child comes and lives in your house, he can live there for 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, 10 years. There is no question of tolerance. There is only universal acceptance. Unfortunately, the West, which creates the mainstream narrative, does not understand the complexity of Indian society. And that's why they say you have become intolerant. So politically, there is no issue of accepting or tolerating people. Education system allows you that. Culturally, it allows you that. I do not understand why suddenly one fine morning the entire world starts saying India is an intolerant country. Why do they think that we are not inclusive people? If we were not inclusive people, how is it possible on that earth that you have so many religions which have come, and not only religions, so many original political theories have emerged in India. Gandhism, no violence. Where has it come from? Do you know that all revolutions in the world have failed? Every single revolution has failed. The only revolution which has succeeded in the history of humanity, and that is India's freedom movement. We are not a country of lesser importance. We are a great society which has been tested over 8,000-10,000 years. We were invaded, no problems. We gave them space. We were colonized, no problems. We gave them space. We were colonized again, sort of intellectual colonization of India after independence. We were so dependent on Soviet philosophy and Sovietism, USSR of that time, right? No problems, we gave them space. People have been attacking us and we have been taking it. You know why? Because what is India after all? India is not few rich people. India is not people who control the narrative. India is made of these hard-working people who, despite any resources, who despite all the problems on the earth, you name the problem, you will find it exists in India. Poverty, unemployment are not the only problems. Even in terms of heat, even in terms of mosquitoes, even in terms of malnutrition, every kind of single problem in the world, you will find it exists in India. Despite that, we have survived and we lived together for 10,000 years. I think that is one greatest of the strengths which must be celebrated. Couple of decades ago, in New York, electricity went off for 2 years. For 2 hours, sorry, for 2 hours. And some 100,000 people were arrested for stealing. Right? At this rate, imagine in India, if Indians had to behave like them, somebody stopping you by law is not the real judgment of a society. The reason most of the people are not really killing each other because of racism in US is because the law and order is so strong. That's a greatness of the system, not of human beings. In India, you have no law and order. That's why you will find that one case of lynching, the whole world picks it up and tries to show us in wrong light. The second thing is about, people say that somebody is not allowed to eat this, somebody is not allowed to that. I asked recently, just now, 1 hour ago, here only, I met a journalist. I said, what are the issues? He said, people really feel very uncomfortable whenever they read that somebody is being lynched and people are not allowed to eat things. Recently, I was invited by India Today for a conclave in Calcutta. The subject was diversity in food. Wonderful subject because not many countries can hold a seminar on diversity of food. We are one of those very rare societies in the world. We can really have a diversity of food. And that session was anchored by Shri Rajdeep Sardesai. No, that was not my intention though. I was just stating a fact. And every time, I'll tell you how narratives are being built. Every single time, somebody was talking about the greatness of Rasgulla or the greatness of Mysore Pak or something like that, the anchor would say, but no, what about beef? Are you allowed to beef? Can you still cook beef? And I said, nobody cares about beef, but the anchor is so obsessed with the beef. Now this India Today telecast will go all over the world. And the people who are not living in India actually will start thinking, oh, what is happening in my India? Isn't that how you feel? Don't you feel bad when somebody points fingers? It's like somebody points finger at your son or your husband or your wife or your close relative who you love very much. And you know that my relative is not like this, but you can't defend the argument because somebody is saying that. And there were 1,000 people like you, all the Bhadraloka of Calcutta were sitting over there, and slowly after some time they also started agreeing and they started clapping every time somebody asked, what about beef? Everybody would clap. When my turn came, I asked them 2 questions. And I asked them on every forum wherever people are saying that. I said, number 1, please tell me, have you ever met anybody in your entire lifetime? Or you know of anybody who knows of anybody who knows of anyone who has ever been stopped from eating what he wants to eat? Not even one hand came up. And since then I have asked this question in every single speech where I make, not even one hand comes. And I'm asking you again, do you know of anyone who has ever been stopped from eating what he wants to eat in India? Do you know anybody personally? So these people exist only in the minds of the news anchors. Nobody stops you. You can buy anything, you can eat anything, you can wear anything. Yes, we are a constitutional country. Questions have been raised on illegal slaughtering and the smuggling of cattle. In America, I am told you are not allowed to kill horses. In England, I am told you're not allowed to kill swans because they are royal birds. Am I right? I don't know. That's what I've read. I don't trust Google anymore. It can really make a fool out of you any time. Then I asked the second question, how many of you can go back home, I'm talking about India, not here, how many of you can go back home and ask your mother to cook beef tonight in the kitchen? Not many, just few hands, 4 or 5 came, not many came. I said, if you can't influence your mother to cook beef in your own kitchen, why do you want 1.25 million Indians to do that? This is a bogus argument. These kind of arguments come when you cannot fight us on economics. These kind of arguments come when you cannot fight our IT community. When you cannot stop this country from becoming one of the fastest growing and the largest economies of the world. When you cannot stop us from growing in terms of the real education, that is when you start attacking on these unquantifiable things. Then recently there has been a lot of allegation about our women. We are told that your women are not empowered. I believe very differently. You know that Indians have been traveling for many, many thousands of years all over the world. Wherever they go, wherever they have gone, every single country without exception, in thousands of years we have been traveling. That's why Britishers came to colonize us, because we were selling spice, we were one of the richest countries in the world. When it comes to richest countries, let me also just tell you, recently I was in Uzbekistan, because Pallavi has produced a film which I have directed, which is based on the mysterious death of Shri Lal Bahadur Shastri, India's second Prime Minister. So we were shooting in Uzbekistan, I was in Samarkand. In Samarkand, there is Maqbara of Taimurlang, who was the emperor of that time, of that area. And I found there was a stone, and what was inscribed on that stone was very interesting. It said that he had almost captured most of the world, but he refused to be called an emperor. He said, until I conquer the richest state in the world, I won't call myself an emperor, and that richest state was Delhi Sultanate. So he formed a huge army, and he came to Delhi and destroyed Delhi, and in one single night, he killed 100,000 people. Is it possible for somebody to call their child Lenin and Stalin or Taimur or something, or Hitler or Osama? Impossible. But we did. Look at the greatness of this society. So that's what I was trying to tell you, that we were one of the richest countries, that's why we were colonized. And we have been traveling all over the world. There is no country in the world where you won't find Indians, and successful Indians. What is the reputation we enjoy? That wherever we go, people say these are hard-working people, educated people, they always come with knowledge, they share knowledge, always smiling, accommodating, inclusive, never in conflict with the society. Europe is going through a lot of turmoil right now, but you won't find it with Indians. There is no conflict. Indians you'll never find in conflict. These are great human qualities. That's what, when the people who are champions of human rights, when they talk about how the humanity should be, this is exactly what they expect from humanity. When Elon Musk makes drivers the battery-operated cars, the whole world celebrates him. Anybody who invents internet or some great thing, people celebrate them. People say he's a great manufacturer, he has created amazing product. His photo comes on Times cover, everywhere you will find he's being man of the year, woman of the year, entrepreneur of the year, innovator of the year. My question is this: if for thousands of years Indians are known to be one of the finest human beings, then who has been manufacturing these human beings? Where are they coming from? Who has been doing that? Our mothers and sisters. Are they disempowered or empowered? Think about your mothers. I don't know how many people have grown up in India. Can you just give me a, oh my God, that's huge. So all of you know. Okay. Now you think, when you were growing up in India, think about your mother. Think about your father. One household, one earning member, who sacrifices everything just to raise good human beings. One woman, not mostly educated. And what does she do all her life? You mean to say she has no desire? She sacrifices good clothes. She doesn't eat the best food. She always ignores her own health. She always gets the worst mattress to sleep on. She gets up in the morning before you get up, starts cooking food for children, then husband, then she cleans the house. Throughout the day she is working and working and working. All her life she works without enjoying anything. That is Indian woman. And why is she doing this? So that we turn out to be good human beings. How has this world forgotten that the most important job of human beings is to manufacture better human beings? We can celebrate all these cars and the trains and the aircrafts we manufacture. In this world, nobody is going to celebrate this woman who manufactures wonderful human beings. Just because she doesn't have a placard in her hand and saying, I'm a feminist, just because she doesn't look great, because she is wearing clothes which are always a worker's clothes, just because she does not present herself, just because she does not challenge men all the times, and she surrenders and sacrifices her life to make these people, does not mean she is not an empowered woman. Second thing, we are told about the crime and the safety of women. And who's blamed for this? It's not that somebody writes and somebody says that some people do crimes in India. They say the entire Hindu civilization is bad. These people are barbaric and women are not safe there. That's the cause which is being championed, because those are the only articles I read everywhere in the world. And these are the cause Naxals and Maoist and Naxal sympathy, all these urban Naxals have been talking about. Now, just now I was sitting here and there is a report of American government which says that 1 out of all 3 girls in America, before they finish their college, are going to be a victim or they are victims of sexual assault. And they call us rape capital. Look at the difference in numbers and the ratios. So therefore, what I say is, a wrong narrative is being created to stop our growth story, to make us feel confident. And that's why when this boy and girl comes from that family where everybody is working hard to make sure that India has a bright future, and India emerges as one of the strongest nations in the world, and we get our due, which we duly deserve, to be recognized as the most liberal and inclusive civilization on this earth. To stop us from championing that cause, we are told what's wrong with us. Now the last thing I want to tell you about the caste divide. Yes, we have oppressed for many years. There has been a problem. Upper caste has oppressed lower caste. We have not been nice to people. But there's another way of looking at it. When India found independence, if the oppression was at the index of 100 in 1947, where is it now? What's your guess? After 70 years of reservations, where is it now? Is it still at 100? Or has it come down? I am told by all the experts that today the index would be around 15 or 20. In 70 years, we have reduced the oppression from 100 by 80%. That should be celebrated by the entire humanity as the biggest and the most successful social re-engineering. Should be recognized as the biggest social reform. We are the only country in the world which has had multiple prime ministers who were Dalits or from lower caste. Mr. Modi is not the first one. We had a woman prime minister. We had a minority president. Our president right now is from lower caste. You have judges in Supreme Courts, High Courts. You name a position of authority, of control. You name a position of influence where you won't find Dalits and the lower caste people working. In any education, you will find at least 40–50% students who are studying to become engineers, doctors, and economists and lawyers are from lower caste. Can America also stand up and champion the cause the way we have done? They had one black president and the entire system has crumbled that now they have Donald Trump. No, I didn't mean that. Don't laugh. Which is true. One black president and suddenly the whole country became racist and they are talking about racism because they couldn't tolerate one black president. We never even questioned. When I was growing up, there was no question why Indira Gandhi as a woman is a prime minister. Most of the people in India do not even know that one of the prime ministers, I won't name him because I'm in the High Commission, was a Dalit. And believe you me, a lot of people I meet, they don't even know that President Kalam was a Muslim. Because when you are meeting, these are not the questions you ask. We accept people and it's a total acceptance. There is no society in the world besides Hindu civilization where you will find that we believe in cosmic acceptance. Every single thing. I am that, you are that. I am the God. Thou art that, Tattvamasi. It's in our DNA. We don't have to talk about it. We don't have to learn about it. We don't have to argue about it. Therefore, what has been happening, because we are such simple people, that when somebody puts these allegations on us, we go quiet, we say, isme bahas karne ka kya fayda? What's the point arguing? Let him think whatever he thinks. We are living our life. But somebody has to do it. It was somebody's job. When somebody blames us for caste problem, somebody should say, no, it's not true. When they say women are not empowered, somebody has to do it. Our politicians can never do it because they have to go back to the vote bank. Somebody asked me why, when everybody knows, the intelligence agencies know, why the politicians or the government doesn't stop them. Because they go to them, they have guns, they control tribal votes, therefore they can't do anything. They have their own compulsions, their own problems. But I say, why our citizens have forgotten to speak for themselves? And that's why I have been traveling non-stop and working to champion the cause of Hindu civilization, to at least let our youngsters know that we are one of the finest people in the world. You have to learn to believe in it. But the very sad commentary is, before I finish, I met a professor in IIT Bombay. And he is the professor when somebody tops in G in IIT exams, the number one student is assigned to him. He's such a wonderful... He was telling me that all my life I go to conferences, World Science Congress, World Maths Congress, and I talk about Vedic mathematics and Vedic science. And the whole world respected him and really loved him. He said, but for last few years, when I talk about Vedic mathematics, people call me regressive. They call me Sanghi. So I have stopped doing that. This is what's been happening in India. You'll be surprised to know, recently I met one of the finest environmentalists in Calcutta, and they have started something called ethnobotany. Ethnobotany comes from the science which was written in Yajurveda 10,000 years ago, and they are wondering how these people knew about every single plant on this earth. Because if you know in our Vedas, they know is disease ka, this is the cure, you pick up this plant. They said, how do they know that they just go in the jungle, pick up a plant? So they have started a discipline called ethnobotany, which is based after our Veda. So I say, if you have space for Marx, for Lenin, for Stalin, for Mao, people who killed 250 million people, it's so sad that we don't have space for Vedas. The minute you talk about it, people start laughing and they say you are regressive. This must change. This will change only when you start believing in yourself. If I have reached here today, everybody stopped me. All the doors were shut for me. I don't know any politician. I don't know anybody. I'm just, like Tagore said, ekla chalo re. I'm walking alone. Aap sabne mujhe dekha hai piछले 3-4 दिन से I finish a function, go somewhere else. I am walking alone with my wife. And let me tell you, if you are a real Indian, you must believe that woman is Prakriti, you are just a Purush. It's only when Purusha and Prakriti meet, then only you can find Ishwar. So I take my Saraswati with me everywhere. And despite all the death threats, despite all the resistance and movement, not even once she asked me, let's reconsider this. Not even once. And therefore, I go on and on and on to tell you that believe in three things, which are Indian philosophy. If you want to be a true Indian, number one, do not abandon Saraswati, which we have done. We have all abandoned Saraswati. We run only after Lakshmi and Durga these days. Right? Because when was the last time you gifted a book to any youngster? Anybody? Very few hands. That's not a good thing. You should every year. On Diwali, don't give mithais. What's the point? They get fat. Sugar is poison. Sugar is really poison. Ask any cardiologist. He will tell you. Pick up 12 books. Pick up 12 good books, interesting books on science, on mythology, on art, whatever you want, and gift it to some young people. They will remember you all your life. 50 years later, they will go to their library, pick up a book, they'll see your sign and name, and they'll remember as somebody who contributed to their life. They won't remember your sweets and patakas. On anybody's birthday, gift books. It's our duty. How do we know about the world? Because your grandmother, your aunts, your neighbors, your professor, they told you stories. You read Amar Chitra Kathas, Nandan, and all those in whichever language you get these things. Do that. Second thing, service. Giving back to the society. It's very important. We start believing when we grow, we have a car under us, we have a house, we are in foreign country earning money, we start believing that whatever has happened to your life has happened because of you. Which is absolutely, it's false. Whatever you are because of a society. Imagine if you were born in any other society. You could have been a mafia person, right? You could have been a criminal, you could have been a terrorist, you could have been a racist, but you are not. So giving back to the society is so important, not in terms of money. Educate, share your knowledge. We are known for people with wisdom. Krishna was born there, Buddha was born there. Share your knowledge, whatever you know. Everybody knows something very special, which other people don't know. Share that knowledge. So service is very important. And the third thing I say, believe in, is spirituality. And by spirituality, I do not mean closing your eyes and doing meditation. Meditation is not spirituality. It can take you to spirituality, but meditation alone is not spirituality. The real spirituality is internal dialogue. Have a dialogue with yourself. Take time out, go alone, travel alone. Sit somewhere alone, think about yourself. Internal dialogue. It's only when you have internal dialogue, you have self-belief. When you run early in the morning, you feel so confident. So when your mind, body and soul together work, you have a lot of belief in yourself. And then only you will understand that inside you is such greatness, is sitting such enlightened power. Because when the West was traveling all over the world and discovering the geographical continents to colonize them and to invade and capture them, at that time, we were the only society which was actually exploring the internal continents of our mind and soul. We come from there. Go back, discover your own. There are so many continents inside you. Discover them. You will find collectively, together, we Indians will ultimately, like our Prime Minister says, and that's one thing I like what he says, that in this century, it's our duty to show the path to the world. So thank you everybody. Thank you Indian High Commission. I really feel great whenever I see Indian flag hanging on a building, and nothing can be more pleasurable for me with Gandhiji in the background, wonderful people in the front. Thank you very much.